There is a childhood wound that rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with shouting. It doesn't leave bruises. In fact, many people who carry it would tell you they had a perfectly normal childhood, and that is exactly what makes it so difficult to see. Imagine a small child standing in the doorway of the living room. Their eyes are bright with excitement. In their hands is a drawing they spent the entire afternoon making. For a few seconds, they wait, certain that someone will smile, certain that someone will look. But the television keeps playing. A phone screen keeps glowing. Someone quietly says, "Just leave it over there." The child nods, walks away, and something far more important than the drawing is left behind. Moments like these almost never become family stories. Parents forget them. Children usually don't, not because they remember the moment itself, but because their nervous system remembers what the moment meant long before a child understands language. Their brain is already asking one question, over and over again. When I reach for someone, will someone reach back? The answer to that question comes more than a memory. It becomes a prediction. If reaching brings silence, often enough, the brain quietly changes its strategy. The child doesn't decide to stop meeting people. The child's nervous system decides that meeting people feels unsafe. This is why emotional neglect can be so invisible. Nothing dramatic has to happen. 1,000 ordinary moments are enough. One unanswered story, one emotion no one notices, one disappointment, carried alone, until eventually the child stops reaching before anyone has the chance to turn away. Years later, people admire that child for being independent, for never asking for help, for being so mature. But what if those qualities were never signs of strength? What if they were signs of adaptation? Because sometimes the personality the world celebrates is actually a survival strategy the child never chose. And once the brain learns to survive by becoming invisible, it begins to reshape far more than childhood. It begins to shape the person you believe you are. The heartbreaking part is this. Children never stop needing love. They simply become quieter, not asking for it. From the outside, it looks like acceptance. Inside the brain, something very different is happening. Every time a child reaches for comfort, their nervous system pays close attention to what happens next. Not because it is judging their parents, because it is trying to predict the future. Imagine standing outside a door that almost never opens. The first few times, you knock with hope, then with hesitation. Eventually, you stop knocking altogether. Not because the door changed, because your brain has learned not to expect it to open. This is remarkably similar to what psychologists describe through attachment theory. Long before children understand words like trust, rejection, or emotional neglect, their brains are already collecting evidence. Every warm response whispers, "The world is safe." Every unanswered emotion quietly asks another question. What if I'm on my own? The brain is built to notice patterns. One afternoon of silence means very little, but hundreds of ordinary moments begin to form something much more powerful than memories. They become expectations. Expectations about whether people will listen, whether emotions are welcome, whether asking for comfort brings connection or disappointment. Over time, those expectations sink. Beneath conscious thought, the child no longer chooses. Hide their feelings. Their nervous system makes that choice first. By adulthood, protecting themselves no longer feels like a survival strategy. It simply feels like who they are. This is why emotional neglect is so difficult to recognize. Its fingerprints rarely appear as obvious pain. Instead, they quietly disguise themselves as personality, the person who never asks for help, the friend who says, "Don't worry about me," the partner who apologizes for having needs, the employee who carries every burden alone. People admire their independence. Do you ever wonder what it costs to build it, because survival has an extraordinary ability to imitate strength. Years later, many of those same people stop knocking on emotional doors long before anyone has the chance. Close them. Not because rejection has happened, because their brain has already predicted it. And that prediction begins to shape every conversation, every relationship, and every choice they make, which raises a question most people never think to ask. Are these really personality traits, or are they the invisible echoes of a child who simply learned that no one was coming to answer? The difficult truth is this: the brain can outgrow childhood while still carrying childhood expectations. Years later, someone new enters your life. They're kind, patient, they listen. For a moment, it feels safe to reach. So you tell them a little more about yourself than you usually would. Then they become busy for a day. Your message sits unanswered. Nothing has happened. No argument. No rejection. Just silence. But inside, something much older awakens. The mind begins collecting evidence. Maybe I said too much. Maybe they're losing interest. I should probably stop reaching. The strange part is, this reaction isn't really about the unanswered message. It's about every unanswered moment that came before it. Psychologists call this an internal working model. It is the quiet blueprint the brain builds from early relationships. Before you consciously judge a situation, your nervous system has already asked a familiar question. Is it safe to reach? Or should I protect myself? The brain isn't searching for the truth. It is searching for what feels familiar. And if silence once meant emotional distance, it may continue treating silence as danger, even when no danger exists. This is why so many ignored children grow into adults who become extraordinary at understanding everyone else's emotions. They notice the smallest change in someone's voice. They sense disappointment before it is spoken. They offer comfort without being asked, yet when the moment comes to share their own fears, they hesitate, not because they have nothing to say, but because a younger part of them is still waiting for permission to matter. Perhaps the deepest wound was never being ignored. Perhaps it was slowly learning to believe that your feelings should always take second place. The heartbreaking irony is, the people who long to be understood often become the ones who reveal themselves the least, not because they stopped needing connection, but because they learned to pull their hand back before anyone else could. The child never stopped reaching. They simply learned to do it invisibly. But if those expectations were learned, then they are not the end of the story. Because what the brain learns through repetition, it can also learn to change. For years, the brain carried one quiet expectation. Reaching leads to silence. It wasn't a belief chosen through reason. It was written through repetition. And because it was learned through experience, it can only be changed through experience, not all at once, one moment at a time. Imagine another difficult evening. Your fingers rest above the keyboard. You begin typing, then stop. The familiar voice returns. Don't bother them. Handle it yourself. You'll be fine. Your hand almost retreats, just as it has so many times before. But this time, you leave the message exactly where it is. You press send. Then you wait. Minutes pass. The silence feels painfully familiar. For a moment, it seems as though nothing has changed. Then your phone vibrates. A single message appears. I'm here. Tell me what happened. To someone else, those words might pass unnoticed. But to a nervous system that spent years expecting silence, they become something far more powerful than comfort. They become new evidence. Evidence that not every hand you reach toward will disappear. Evidence that not every silence is abandonment. Evidence that the future does not always repeat the past. This is how the brain begins to change, not because it forgets what happened, but because it slowly discovers that its oldest prediction is no longer always true. Healing rarely arrives as one life-changing moment. It grows quietly, through experiences that the frightened child inside you never believed were possible. A conversation that doesn't end in rejection. A need that doesn't push someone away. A hand that reaches back. Perhaps that is the quiet truth, hidden inside emotional neglect. The deepest wound was never that a child reached for love. It was that they slowly learned reaching was dangerous, and healing begins when life gently teaches the opposite, that reaching is not a guarantee of rejection. It is simply the courage to discover that silence is no longer the only answer. The child who stopped reaching never disappeared. They were simply waiting for one experience that proved the world could answer differently. Thank you for watching Quiet Power. Until next time, keep looking inward, because sometimes quietest truths have the power to change everything.